And I just want to start by saying thank you, too. Thank you for coming back this week. Because last week we talked about sex, right? And so you still came back. I'm glad that you did. I did have one gentleman after church last week who came up to me and said, you made a mistake. You made a mistake today. And I said, oh, what was that? And he said, you didn't tell us to go home and practice. So that's your homework, right? All right, go home and practice. All right. Today is the end of this 3-week kind of a mini-series that we've been doing in Proverbs as we look at Proverbs over the whole summer. But this particular little piece has been called The Battle Within. And we've been given some very powerful God-given gifts and appetites and drives inside of us that can become a spiritual battlefield for us. They are an opportunity for us to decide in our everyday life, what am I going to live for? Who am I going to live for? Am I going to try and live my life in the wisdom of God and the advice and the order that He's created and follow that? Or am I going to try and rely and lean on my own understanding and my own wisdom? It's a battle inside of us. And this week we're going to talk about one more spiritual battle that I think doesn't get enough attention, and that is the sin of sloth. The sin of sloth. And sloth is one of those words that's just a fun word to say, so let's all say it together. Sloth. What a great word. Sloth. What is sloth? The traditional definition of sloth is simply laziness. Laziness is what sloth is. And so if you are thinking of maybe the animal kingdom, when you hear that word sloth, you might think of this critter. This is a sloth. If I had a sloth and could bring it in today, that'd be fantastic. I don't have one, but if I could have brought one in today and set it on the ground when I started talking, it started walking that direction, it would not yet be even halfway to the middle row. They move 6 to 8 feet a minute, right? They're slow. They sleep and they rest for 20 hours a day. They don't move. 20 hours a day. A sloth is it's an incredible thing. You can kind of see this one's got a green tint to it. That's because they move so little that algae starts to grow on them and they get greener as they get older. And so that may be the image that comes to your mind when you think of the word sloth and you apply that to a person, somebody who is who's slow. They just kind of lay in bed. They don't do very much. They don't work very hard. They're in their parents' basement. They got Cheetos and crumbs are kind of everywhere, scattered around. They're just a sloth, right? That's what Proverbs would call that guy, a sluggard. A sluggard. That's a great word too, but I'm not going to make you say it. Proverbs would call that guy a sluggard. Now, I want you, just for fun, what is the antithesis, the opposite of a sluggard? What might that be? I think it would be somebody who is always on the move. Somebody who's always working. They're always going somewhere. They're always doing something. They've always got some other, task to complete. They got to drop kids off. They got to, got this appointment. Got to go do this errand. No time to stop. I got, another thing on my list that I have to do. My friend Tim from Kentucky, for instance, he is a hard worker. He's a guy who is kind of like that, the opposite of a sloth. He's always got stuff going on. Parkinson's has slowed him down a little bit the last few years, but he preaches and he's on the radio all the time and he coaches and he parents and he grandparents. He's always got something that he's doing. My friend Tim posted this picture on Facebook this past week. Tim, 10 years ago, got struck by lightning. He was out in his yard, back in his yard, in the back of his house, and he was doing the next thing on his list. He was working hard and going at it and just doing yard work back there, and he saw this storm coming off in the distance, but these are his exact words 10 years later. He said, I thought I'd just finish up before it got bad. I did not. No, he did not. He didn't get finished. My friend Tim he's not a sloth in any sense of the word. He's always doing so. He's not lazy. He's a guy who he sees a storm coming. He's like, I can get this done so I can get to the next thing on my list. But at that moment, My friend Tim wasn't being wise, was he? Wasn't being wise. In fact, you could say that the definition of a sloth goes a little bit deeper than laziness. The biblical definition of sloth is this: it's delaying or avoiding or refusing to be responsible for things you already know you ought to be responsible with. The contrast between a sloth, right, the animal, and my friend Tim, there's an interesting tension when we talk about the biblical sin of sloth, or as Proverbs calls it, being a sluggard. If being a sluggard just means not moving, if that's all it means, then Tim's the opposite of that. And many of us would look at our lives, and we would say, I'm not a sluggard. I'm doing stuff all the time. Nate, you should see my calendar. It's stuffed, right? I got to go here. I got to go there. I got to work. I take the overtime every time I can get it. I'm exhausted. I work 60 hours a week. I'm wiped out. I'm not a sluggard. How could I possibly be a sluggard? Here's how. The warnings in the book of Proverbs about being a sluggard are more profound than just asking, am I super busy or not? You can have a packed schedule and still neglect the things that are important. You can have a busy schedule and neglect your marriage or your children or neglect your soul. You can have a packed schedule full of church stuff, church activities, and neglect something else that is maybe more important, friendship with God, let's say. It's like it was with gluttony. Remember we talked about gluttony a few weeks ago. And with gluttony, the first thing that comes to mind is food. It's overeating. But gluttony is about so much more than food, right? Gluttony is about, is there anything in my life that I find myself, when I look at it, I'm unable to just stop. And I'm unable to just say, that's enough. It's about a lot more than food. And sloth in the Bible has that kind of depth. It's different. It's kind of like that. It's not just a question of laziness. And it even goes beyond, am I a responsible sort of person? Biblical sloth is a question of engagement. Am I engaging properly with this creation that God has made and with the order that He has, placed in? Am I engaging properly in that? He has put me here for a reason. And so, why would I delay? Why do I avoid? Why do I make excuses? Why is it that I have stopped delighting in God and in the life that He's given me? And so I tell you all that I hope that you see that even if you're not a couch potato, you can still be a sloth. And we're gonna talk about being a couch potato, okay? But this applies to everybody. It applies to me too. And so just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through kind of what it means to be a sluggard, and then a few things that we can learn from one of God's creatures about engaging with God's world as we were created to do by Him. Here's the first problem with being a sluggard. And we're going to look at several different Proverbs today. We're not going to be in just one place. But Proverbs chapter 6, verse 9 and verse 10. Solomon, the writer of most of this book, he looks down at his dad, looks down at his son, laying there on the couch, on the bed. And here's what he says, verse 9. He says, "How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep?" And then most people think that verse 10 is like this sarcastic response, this kind of a mock quotation that the father is imagining that his son would say back to him. "Oh, Dad, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest." Here's the first problem with sloth. The first problem that it causes is that the sluggard won't decide. They won't decide. He won't make up his mind. Dad says, simple question. How long are you going to sleep? How long are you going to sleep? It'd be an easy question to give an answer to, but the sluggard won't give one. He won't give a definitive answer. What does he say? Not yet. Maybe later. Maybe tomorrow. I'll get around to it sometime. Dad, just a little bit longer. Little sleep, little slumber, little bit of rest. Here's what Ray Ortlund says. Ray Ortlund says that the sluggard will not give an honest refusal, but he deceives himself with an endless sequence of little compromises. Little sleep, little slumber, a little bit of rest. It would almost be better if the sluggard's son laying there on the couch, laying on the bed, would come right out and say, "You know what, Dad? I'm not going to do anything today. I'm just going to sit around. It'd almost be better if he would say that, because then at least there'd be something that his dad could talk with him and go back and forth with him about and have this dialogue about. But the sluggard, he figures all kinds of little ways to keep putting decisions off until another day. And that's how you end up with a to-do list at home that's 30 or 40 or 50 items on it, right? Projects on it. The problem is that you came right out and said, no, I'm not doing that. What's the problem? You said, not today. I'll do that one tomorrow. And pretty soon you end up with this giant list. Sloth rarely looks all that dramatic. It looks like 1,000 tiny delays. And so take it away from the realm of your to-do list at home, and maybe you've said something like this: I know I need to have that difficult conversation, but not today. I know I need to apologize to my spouse. I know I do. I'll do it tomorrow. I know I need to, schedule that doctor's appointment. I know I need to start the budget. I know I need to get back to my Bible reading. Not today. The sluggard's favorite word is not no. His favorite word is later. I'll do it later. The sluggard won't decide, all right? He won't decide. That's the first problem with a sluggard. But it's not only that. Here's another proverb. Proverbs 26, verse 15. A sluggard, says Solomon, buries his hand in the dish, but he's too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. He's too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. It's almost as if this dad finally, cajoled his son into getting up off of the bed and getting moving. So the son heads to the fridge, and he pulls open the freezer door, and he pulls out this bucket of ice cream. And then he goes over to the drawer, and he pulls out a spoon and gets the ice cream scoop, comes back to the bucket, cracks open the lid, and he sticks that scoop way down in there, and then he just can't muster the energy to get it up because he's so exhausted, right? He dips his hand into the bowl, but he is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. He's able to start, but he's not able to finish, and that's the second problem with a sloth or with a sluggard. The sluggard won't finish. Some sluggards have a hard time getting started at all with 60 items on their list. Other sluggards, they can get started, but they can't finish. They have a hard time finishing projects, and maybe that's you. You at least, you started on your list, but now it's full of half-finished things. You got, we take it into the realm of, again, past the to-do list and into life. You got unresolved conversations. You got into a conversation with your spouse or with your boss. You started it, but then you never got back to them the next day, right? To clear it up or to finish up the thoughts that you guys needed to get out. Now it's 2 weeks later and you still haven't done it. It's you got spiritual intentions, right? This happens all the time with New Year's resolutions. You started something in January and you never practiced long enough for it to turn into a habit. The sluggard doesn't finish. I've got a dryer vent at my house. I put in the ultra hard work of lifting the lid of my laptop and typing in all these words to get to Amazon. And then I looked through, hundreds of options of dryer vents out there. And then I finally found the right one, and I dragged my finger all the way over and hit the submit button, right? And it came the next day, and I made the trek out to my front porch. And I bent all the way down, right? And it was all I could do to stand back up and bring the dryer vent into my house, and now it's been sitting on my dresser for 2 months. 2 months. I'm embarrassed to tell you. 2 months it's been sitting on my dresser. I have not even attempted to install it yet. You know what's super sad about that? I'm sure that it's past the return date. So if it is, in fact, doesn't fit in my particular space, what would Solomon say about me? He'd say, I'm a fool, aren't I? Because now I've not only put this off, but now it's costing me money if it doesn't work. And so what is your dryer vent? What's the dryer vent in your life. A room that's half painted, exercise machine that's gathering dust in the corner, a Bible plan that you abandoned. The sluggard has enough energy to begin, but he doesn't have enough commitment to persevere. Some sluggards won't decide, others won't finish. And then there's a third problem with sluggards, and you find this one in two of the funnier, more memorable Proverbs in the entire book. Proverbs 26:13 and 22:13, they're similar. A sluggard says, "There's a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets." And then the other verse says, the sluggard says, "There's a lion outside. I'll be killed in the public square." In other words, I can't go outside. I might get hit by a truck. I can't do it. That's what a sluggard says. And it's the third problem with sloth, is that the sluggard won't face reality. A sluggard won't face reality. The honest truth about this particular sluggard is he's partly right, isn't he? He could go outside and get killed by a lion. There is a chance that could happen to you too. You know that? That could happen to you. You could go outside the doors of your house, and there is, I looked this up, there is a 1 in a billion chance that you will be attacked and killed by a lion, by a mountain lion. You know, you're 3 times more likely to win Powerball than you are to get ripped, to shreds by a lion, but there is a chance that it could happen. You could walk out of here and get torn up. It's true what the sluggard says, but the odds of it, right? The odds of it are so small, they're so minuscule that it might as well be a fantasy. The sluggard is inventing imaginary obstacles in order to avoid real responsibilities in his life. That's what he's doing. You might remember that the basic definition of a fool, of a biblical fool, is somebody who will not recognize and admit and concur with the fact that God has created this world and that he has created a certain order to it, that there's an order to the reality that we live in. We call that reality the real world. And what does reality say about stepping outside your door? Reality says the most likely the worst thing that can happen today is that you'll have a hard time breathing because of smoke from Canada. That's the worst thing that's possibly. The sluggard won't acknowledge that. He won't acknowledge that reality, and so they come up with excuses to avoid it. I don't have enough time. Somebody else can do this better. I'll start when life settles down. I need to get more prepared first, right? All kinds of excuses to ignore the reality of the what God has placed in front of us to do. A lot of times, but not always, but a lot of times they're just imaginary. They're imaginary lions that we are kind of making up in our mind. And so the sluggard uses excuses as a reason to stay indoors and not to do anything, to stay disengaged from this world that God has placed us in. He refuses to walk out his door by making excuses. What is actually out there? When you open the door of your home and you walk out onto the front steps, what does real life look like out there for you? You've got maybe 70 or 80 years on this planet to live. How are you going to maximize those years? How are you going to maximize those days and make the most of the time that God has given you? Engaged with this reality that God has placed you. I love what Ray Ortlund says. He says, what's really out there for you is a life, a job, a mission to fulfill for Christ. And that's not just for preachers. That's for everybody. God has put you out there with a life, a job, and a mission to fulfill for Christ. So where can we find an example of somebody like that or something like that? Solomon says to the sluggard, he says, hey, sit up, pay attention, prop open your eyes for a second. I'm going to show you something, Solomon says. I'm going to show what it means to be on a mission. And so you might wonder, what is this fabulous, complex, complicated, amazing creature that we and any other sluggards are going to look to for inspiration in fulfilling our mission? Here's this. Proverbs chapter 6, Solomon says, Go to the ant. Go to the ant. You sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer, no ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. Go to the lowly ant to find the kind of inspiration that it can provide to any of us who are sluggards or wrestle with sloth every day. You should look up ants sometime. I don't know if you've ever done that. Ants are amazing creatures. They are amazing. Ants, the typical ant has a brain that is the size of a pinpoint, not like a writing pen, like a stick-you-pen, the size of a pinpoint. And yet, ants can figure out the shortest, most direct, most efficient route to wherever they need to get to every time. Ants know how to work together to build ladders to get up on the top of things that they couldn't do by themselves. Ants know how to build bridges and get across spaces. Ants, they coordinate with other colonies of ants. And they build rafts. And they go across literal rivers. And Solomon says, hey, pinhead, right? Hey, sluggard, look up. Look up at the ant. You don't get to look down on the ant. Look up at the ant. Because the ways of the ant, Solomon says, the wisdom of the ant is a lot higher than yours. Take a step up into the world of the ant. When we look at the ant, this creature made by God that we would do well to mimic. I'm going to tell you three things that I see. Here's one. The ant has inner motivation. He's got inner motivation. It knows why it works. Verse 7, it has no commander, no overseer, no ruler. There's no boss ant. There's nobody who's standing over the top of it saying, whoosh, whoosh, do this, do this. He doesn't need that. She doesn't need that. The ant doesn't need somebody standing over it all the time. It understands instinctively, intuitively, what it's created to do. It's got inner motivation. This is about your character. It's about your character. What's your inner motivation for getting off the couch and for stepping out your door into this reality that God has made? It's got to be about something more than paying the bills, right? Paying the bills is a noble thing. You got to do it, right? It's kind of a necessary evil in some ways. You got to do that, but that's a terrible reason for going to work. That's a terrible reason for walking out your front doors. If it's just to pay the bills, you're missing out on something. Work is according to God, it's a gift. According to the Bible, it's a gift. And Tim Keller, he points this out. He says that the Bible is distinctive among all the other ancient cultures and the ancient teachings. The Babylonians, for example, he says, the Babylonians have a creation story that tells how man and woman are created. And in their creation story, the gods get tired of manual labor. And that's why they make men and women, so that the men and women have to do the manual labor for them. The Greeks and the Romans, they didn't despise work so much, but they definitely despised manual labor. That was like the most inferior form of work that you can imagine to the Greeks and the Romans was manual labor. You maybe have heard the story of Pandora's box, the myth of Pandora's box. Do you know what comes out of Pandora's box? Death and disease and all kinds of evil and work. Work comes out of Pandora's box. And all these ancient cultures are like that, but not the Bible. You read the Bible, and what do you find God doing at first? What's the first thing he's doing? He's got his hand in the dirt, right? This is what Tim Keller says. He's got his hands in the dirt, making a man, forming a man out of the dust of the ground. What's the Holy Spirit doing? The Spirit is there kind of hovering over the waters. The Spirit's working there at creation too. Psalm 104 says that the Spirit renews creation. The Spirit renews the creatures. And when God comes to earth as a man, Jesus comes. How does he come? He doesn't come as a philosopher or a king or a general. He comes as a carpenter. He comes as a worker. And God gives Adam and Eve almost one of the very first commands for they're supposed to do. He gives them work. It's gardening. They've got work to do. It's a gift. It came before sin. It was a gift to them. In other words, work is not an evil. It's not even a necessary evil. It's not a curse. Work is good. It's part of the order of this reality that God has made. And so, because God has gifted us work, it means that if we aren't doing it, or if we're doing work that we aren't proud of, as Tim Keller says, then we're not living in sync with the reality that God has made. And by now, you know, what does that make you? It makes you a fool if you're not living in accord with that reality. If you wrestle with sloth, the sin of laziness or avoiding things that you know you're responsible for by staying busy with other things, here's a good question to ask yourself. What is it that motivates me when nobody else is watching? What is it inside of me that makes me move when nobody else is watching? And some of you, I think, probably need reminded that your work is spiritual work. Whether you're retired or just getting into the work field or been at your job for 30 years, your work is spiritual work. And I'm not talking about religious work. You don't have to be a preacher or missionary or teach at a Christian school for it to be spiritual work, right? Because it's a gift from God, because God is involved in giving you this work, everything that you do for your work is potentially spiritual. You teach a child, you fix a machine, you write code, you care for a patient, you serve a customer, you raise a family, you build something. You are participating in God's good work in the world when you do that. What is it that motivates you to go out of the door and do your work when nobody's watching? Here's another thing about the ant. The ant isn't afraid of hard work. He's not afraid of hard work. Verse 8, it stores its provisions in summer, and it gathers its food at harvest. The ant knows how it's supposed to work. It knows what needs to be done, and then it does it. The ant doesn't make excuses. The ant doesn't procrastinate. It doesn't complain about the weather. Oh, it's too hot outside. There's no waiting until conditions are perfect. I can't go outside today because I'm going to choke to death on Canada. The ant doesn't do that. You've been at a picnic before, right? Or just sitting outside, and you see this ant crawl up to you, right? And maybe you've been eating a granola bar or whatever it is, and there's crumbs that are falling. Maybe it's Cheetos, and there's crumbs falling all around. And what does the ant do? He comes up, and the crumb's twice as big as he is, and he picks it up, and he carries it off, right? And 5 minutes later, here he comes back again. Doesn't matter if it's 100 degrees out. Doesn't matter anything. The ant knows how it's supposed to work. It doesn't care about it. It just keeps faithfully doing what it was created to. So let me ask you this one. What responsibility of yours has God already made clear to you that you have been avoiding? What responsibility has God made clear to you that you've been avoiding? Because remember, the sluggard's always waiting for tomorrow. The sluggard's always waiting for to be in a better mood or for more motivation, for life to settle down. Wisdom says, do God's work now. Do God's work today. And that's how God works in our lives too. You know this. We think about faithfulness and Hebrews 11 and being a hero of the faith, right? Real faithfulness is not about making heroic decisions and this one big thing that turns you into a hero of faith. Being a hero of faith is about making 1,000 little decisions to do the right thing and to be wise in that way. What is one responsibility that you need to embrace instead of avoiding? Here's the last thing about the mighty ant. The ant prepares for the future. It knows that tomorrow's coming. Verse 8 again, it stores its provisions in summer. That's provisions is something you're setting aside, and gathers its food at harvest. The ant never assumes that life is always going to be easy. The ant doesn't waste time hoping winter won't come. The ant knows that another season is always coming, so it's always preparing, always getting ready for the next thing. And that's wisdom, says Solomon. Wisdom doesn't panic, doesn't need to panic, because it's always prepared before a crisis comes up. Remember a year and a half ago up in northern Michigan, and all we got was rain in March 2025. What'd they have? 3 days in a row of freezing rain. And people are, lost property and all kinds of stuff. But not only that, they didn't have power, they didn't have food, they ran out of stuff. Here's what one of the volunteers at a warming center in Atlanta, Michigan, said this. He said, people weren't just looking for heat; They needed food, they needed water, they needed charging stations, they needed internet access, they needed everything. Because they never imagined, this guy said, they never imagined they'd be without power for that long. That's exactly Solomon's point. Don't wait until you're sitting in the warming center to think about preparing for the next storm. Prepare while the power is still on. So here's the question. What are you doing today, right now, that your future self will thank God for? What are you doing right now that your future self will thank God for? Because you don't know what's coming. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what season is coming. Maybe it's a health deal that's coming for you. Maybe it's financial pressure. Maybe you lose a job, or maybe somebody in your family loses a job, or maybe your marriage is going to get hard, or maybe your parent's going to fall, and then they need a month or 6 weeks of care, and who's going to take care of that? Maybe it's a season of grief, or a way that your faith is going to be tested. None of us knows what's around the corner, but all of us know that something is around the corner. All of us know that. The wise person prepares before they're forced to. Sluggards wait until it's too late. The danger of sloth isn't just that we waste time. The danger of sloth is that we slowly become the kind of people we are not awake and alert to the kinds of things that God is asking us to engage with in everyday life. Ray Ortland's dad was a preacher too, and he said this. He said, our danger is not that we become criminals, but that we become respectable, decent, commonplace, mediocre Christians. Sometimes the greatest threat to our lives is not some giant, big sin like murder or things like that. It's the greatest danger to our spiritual life sometimes is these little things where we repeatedly, over and over and over and over, choose comfort instead of faithfulness. Let me say this one more time. This is the last time I'm going to say this in this series. should I say I promise? Maybe not. I won't say I promise, but this is the last time I'm going to say it, at least today. The answer to all this is not try harder. That's not the answer. The answer is not work harder. The answer is not try harder. The good news of Jesus, you think about Jesus, he comes. He wakes us up. Jesus comes, and what does he say? He says, follow me. He says, take my yoke upon you. Right? You know what a yoke is? Right? This wooden thing that they put over oxen to let them work together. Jesus says, come yoke up with me. Come work with me. How did Jesus work? Was Jesus ever disengaged with reality? Never. He was always there in the moment. He was always being aware of what God wanted him to do next, and who God wanted him to be next. Jesus was always on point. And Jesus took my sloth, he took your laziness, he took your failure to be engaged with the world, to embrace this life that God has given us. What did he do with it? He took that to the cross. And because on the cross he finished his work, that allows you and me to faithfully embrace this privilege that he's given to us of being fully engaged and fully delighting in what he has given to us, our work and in our rest and in our play. I would just plead with you today. Don't waste the life that God has given to you. Don't have a to-do list that's 60 items long. And I'm not just talking about things around the house. Don't have a list, that stuff in your head that's important that you keep saying, I'll do that tomorrow. Man, you only get a few years on this planet. Don't waste the life that God has given to you. Embrace those responsibilities. Can I pray for you that will happen in your life and in mine? Because I know that I need it. God, we are grateful for the wisdom of Solomon. And today we're grateful for the wisdom of the ant. And what a tiny creature yet that shows us so much. God, it shows us a better way to live than sometimes we choose to live. And so, Lord, we're asking that you would energize your Holy Spirit inside of us so that we will be convicted of areas in which we have, kind of let things slide. God, the areas where we know that there are things that we need to finish. It's work that you've given to us that we need to accomplish. It's important. It matters. And God, help us to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff and understand those tasks in our life that have eternal significance, and help us to lean into those. Not to the detriment of the others. All of it matters, God. We know that. All of this reality you've made matters. But help us to be focused on the stuff that's eternal, and make sure that gets taken care of before stuff that's going to be gone in just a few years. God, we're so thankful that you show us an example of your son Jesus, who lived that out for us and on our behalf, and who takes our sin from us on the cross. What a privilege it is to be your people and to be able to glorify and honor you with our lives. Help us to do that every day. We love you so much, and we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.